Hello and welcome to the new moon reading for the new moon that fell on the 4th of November at 9:15 p.m. UK time. And I'm apologising for the lateness of this because it is just viruses everywhere. We have in this household been down with one thing or another or several things all at the one time. And it has been difficult to find a space where I have been able to talk for about 45 minutes. But thankfully, feeling better today, and so on to the reading. I'm going to do a chapter marker for those who are listening to places where you can jump to chapters, because as ever, I'm going to be doing an introduction for those of you who are new to the new moon reading, and if you are, welcome. So here is the introduction as to how I read the cards. It is nearly always 95% of the time a 3-card reading. It is I read it in real time. In other words, I haven't looked at the cards ahead of time. So when I am talking about the cards, I have just turned them over, and the card positions remain constant. The first card that I turn over being the foundation card. So that is something that has already happened or is in the process of happening, but sort of receding in terms of its intensity. But it has in some way paved the way for what is going to happen in card number 2, which is the prevailing theme or the current weather for the month, for the next 4 weeks and beyond. This theme may dominate in some way in your life, whether it's inside within you, in a relationship, a business partnership, or in your community or in the world. Or it may be more subtle than that, but no less powerful in terms of its impact. So, and in some way, it will be connected intimately with the foundation card. They are interconnected. And then finally, the third card is the card where you are given a focus point of how it is that you can interact meaningfully with the cards, particularly with the foundation card, where in this kind of reading you can't control the foundation card because it's already happened or it's in progress. There's nothing you can do about that. And sometimes the themes are, well, sometimes because they're subtle, you may not necessarily know about them until they're happening, or that they are bigger than you, and therefore you really don't have any decision as to whether they happen or not. And in fact, I'd suggest that that's actually pretty much all of the time. But the agency or tool card is the card where you it's basically a way of focusing the reading through a particular lens, where the lens is useful because you can choose how to use that lens. In other words, you can choose where to shift it, and perhaps be able to home in on finer detail in the overriding theme, so that you have more control. When I say control, maybe it's simply about knowledge being power, and I think that's probably one of the most useful pieces of power that we have, is the empowerment of knowledge, insight, the ability to pause and to reflect about what's going on. So hopefully the tool card will be one that provides that means of reflection. So that is the introduction. And I am going into this reading slightly differently, in as much as I will often refer to other readings if similar cards come up. And interestingly, with this reading, a particular saying came to me just before I sat down. So I'm going to be doing something slightly different. It's not really going to make much of an impact to you, I don't think, but who knows. I had the saying by Bion, who is a celebrated English psychotherapist or psychoanalyst. I think he's English. My apologies if he isn't. But he said that that the psychotherapeutic moment should consist of neither memory nor desire. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I will often refer to other cards previously in the reading, and it's almost as if this reading feels like a standalone reading, and I'm not sure why. And maybe also the desire part of it as well is something about being able to approach the reading as a listener, as a participant, with neither memory nor desire. So in other words, it may be the memory gets in the way of the true meaning, and the desire will also get in the way of the full use of the reading for you. So if you find yourself, when it comes to your sort of gut feel with a card, rather go with that than the immediate overlay that goes over that gut feel, where you feel like you're kind of chivying it down a particular route, wanting it to turn out a particular way, making the cards mean something that perhaps your gut feel wasn't actually showing you. So that's the saying that we're going into the reading with: neither memory nor desire. And with that, I am now going to turn over the first card, which is the foundation card. So remember, this is something that has already happened, is in the process of happening, but diminishing in terms of its intensity, but is paving the way for the second card, which will be coming up shortly. So the first card, the foundation card, is the Empress. Now, the Empress is a major arcana card. That means that it shows up, it has a sort of dual purpose in the reading. The first one is that it can explain something in quite a sort of straightforward interpretative way about something that's going on in your world, whether that's your inner world or your outer world. But also the Empress as a major arcana card will speak to something that is in what is known as the collective unconscious. And that is the aspect of consciousness or beingness that is also connected with your soul. And so the Empress as a major arcana card is relatively early on in the majors. Well, actually pretty early on. The only cards that precede her are the Fool, which is 0, the Magician or the Magus in this deck, which is 1, and then the High Priestess, which is 2. And whereas the High Priestess is it's the feminine aspect or the yin aspect of all of it's the spiritual or liminal space between creation or the creator and matter. So she inhabits that world that is partly between the spiritual realm and the realm of matter. And if you want to see spiritual in another way, she is the mediator between the unconscious and consciousness. That doesn't mean that she can bring everything from the unconscious into consciousness just at will. And in fact, the High Priestess herself can, but we can never fully inhabit the archetype. We can't do that, and therefore the archetype is something that we connect with to a greater or lesser degree. But when we connect with the High Priestess, for example, we are connecting with a sense of intuitive knowing that is not necessarily grounded in our physical world. Now, I say that with the High Priestess to show her as the contrast to the Empress, who is very much grounded in this physical world. She is the Earth Mother archetype, and I would like you to approach this as broadly as you need to, or as specifically as you need to. So broadly, the Earth Mother archetype is nature itself. It is the cycles of nature, and not just the cycles of nature on this planet, but also the cycles and laws of nature within the entire universe. She governs that idea of birth, death, and rebirth. So it can be a flower that grows from a seed in spring and then flourishes in summer and then dies back in autumn and then disappears back into the ground in winter. Or it can be that she governs the birth of a star, the explosion and the supernova, and then the gradual dying back of the star into nothingness. But of course, the Empress, in those larger cycles, it connects us with something beyond ourselves, but we are obviously more interested in the Empress and how she presents in this world where we live. So the Empress is Earth Mother archetype, and I'm going to read some of the writing that's on the card. So it is energy, development, evolution, fertility, success, initiative, an eye for details. And there is an idea here then for being able to look at the potential for life and the potential for nurturing something in the finer detail. Now, when I was speaking in the intro, and for those of you that were listening, that I was talking about the tool card being a sort of focal point, a lens that you can then shift over things so that you can bring up the detail of a particular kind of, particular aspect of the reading. That your tool card is able to focus in on something more specifically. It gives you the ability to see something in finer detail. And the Empress is in some way demonstrating that you are equipped with that ability to do that. So it may be that this is very useful, that this is one of the key points of this reading, is that you are able in some way to hone into the finer detail and see something that you ordinarily would have missed, or you may have missed before, or that you would have missed if you hadn't have known about the fact that there is detail to be looked out for. This will probably become clear over the course of the reading, but I do think that last one, an eye for details, is going to be important in this reading because the Empress is the foundation into this, and I think that when we're dealing with a major archetype like we are with the major arcana, it's sometimes quite difficult to pin them down into anything that is workable or meaningful to us. We can do it sometimes. So, for example, if a woman does a reading and says, am I going to get pregnant? She wants the Empress card if she wants to get pregnant. So that's a very particular practical interpretation. But sometimes the Empress shows up in other ways. And so it behooves us to be aware of the fact that she rules natural cycles and she rules the entire life cycle of everything around us, because by knowing that, then we know that there is a vast spectrum where she could be apparent in a specific form, and it will be that eye for detail that will guide us into that. But of course, the Empress, incredibly feminine. That doesn't matter what sex you are. This is about femininity, being able to tap into something that is not the Emperor. So whereas the Emperor rules over the man-made domain, the domain of structures, both physical, legal, legislative, all of those things, the Empress rules over the domain, of course, that's governed by natural laws. And so therefore there is a certain amount of surrender to processes that are bigger than ourselves. Whereas the Emperor wants to rule his domain, and he wants to do that by bringing things under his control. And he's able to do that because of the nature of who he is and where he is and what he is ruling. The Empress is about surrender to cycles that are beyond our control to a certain degree. And it's not necessarily even surrender, but perhaps even alignment with those cycles. To resist change is to sometimes subject oneself to a very bumpy ride. So, for example, with me, I've just come in from being out in the garden, which I have neglected for a very long time because I've really not felt well enough to go and garden. And I have been putting the garden to bed for the winter. And I generally don't enjoy that anywhere near as much as doing the gardening in early spring, when I'm planting things and waiting for things to grow and then watching as things come to life. By May, June, there's a garden full of flowers. This is different. The flowers have died, or more or less died. There are a couple hanging around because it's been unseasonably warm here. But otherwise, this has been about cutting back, pruning back, sweeping up leaves, pulling out weeds, basically tending to that part, that cycle that is not as pretty for most people. It's certainly not that pretty for me. I don't like it when the sun disappears. I am a sun kind of person. Even if I don't like to lie in it, I like to know that it's out there and I can look out the window or sit in some shade and enjoy it. So for me, the Empress is a good reminder of aligning with nature. So I can sit indoors the whole of winter and get really pissed off about the fact that it's cold and dank and it's raining and windy, and we don't even get snow here in the UK. So it's just basically a grey, damp kind of season. And I can get pissed off about that. Or I can align with nature and just accept the fact that that's what's going to happen. And once I've accepted that, it's much easier then for me to participate in it. And I'm participating in it by putting the garden to bed, by going out walking, knowing that there are leaves falling around me. So there's something there about embracing the nature of change and the change in nature. And remember, this is the natural world, but broaden that out. You're not necessarily thinking of nature as in a garden or a stream, but rather just life cycles. By having a foundation with that, it confers a sense of flexibility, or a sense of being able to not fight against things that are much bigger, but rather able to hold a bit of the Empress in ourselves. And so it's not even, we might just learn to weather the changes, or we might learn to enjoy the changes, to harness the changes, to use those changes, to work with them, rather than to sort of fold our arms and pretend that it's all not happening. I know I'm pretty much talking about me in winter here, but I'm sure that some of you can relate to that, and maybe more of you can relate to that idea applied in different ways about changing in the natural world, and particularly with the changes going on in the environment at the moment. There is something here about taking an Empress-like stance, however that is for you, or that this is something that is there and available because it's already present, it's foundational. So the Empress Major Arcana card, that's your foundation, and it is leading in to card number 2, and that card is the Four of Discs, which is power. Interestingly, I was talking about the Emperor. This is probably one of the most Emperor-like cards in the Minor Arcana. The Emperor is 4 in the Major Arcana, and then you have the Four of Discs here, and of course discs being the material world, anything physical. So it's not just about the natural world, it is anything that we are interacting with. So it can do with the garden, or it could be doing with your business, or it could be doing with a relationship, or anything like that. But it is the physical world, and there is a sense with a 4. 4s I refer to as pauses, and there is a sense with a 4 that is a sort of solidity to it that can either work well or not so well, and we will investigate that as the reading progresses. So visually, the card is strikingly different from the Empress card. The colours are very different. The Empress is a very light, bright, lots of red, lifeblood. I love her fur collar. I love the feathers on her shoulders, her epaulettes and her bodice. And I love her hair. There's just this sort of punk aspect to the Empress that I think is amazing. It's like she's like a punk Queen Elizabeth I. And whereas the Four of Discs, power, is dark, it's purple, it's blue, it's sky. There is a heaviness to it. Can you feel it? There's a heaviness, and it's very difficult to come up with the word to describe it, but if something is 4 square, it is it's stable, but can also be a little bit stolid or a little bit samey. A square is good in certain respects, but it also can get a little bit boring, or it's limited in terms of the expression that it can yield. But if I look at this, and let's see if there's anything written on the Four of Discs that may throw more light, like the light that is coming from behind the emperor-like figure who is sitting on the chair behind the discs. It says integrity, manifestation. So I can see integrity and manifestation and power. Now, this is interesting with the Four of Discs because I'm quite ambivalent when it comes to the interpretation. I think that it is a very good safe haven to be in, but not permanently. And the reason I say that is that if you look at the figure there, he is in a position of power. It's a very, very powerful position. He's there on his chair, and it's almost as if he sent these 4 discs out in front of him that are basically saying to us, like, keep away, this is all mine, you can't get any closer, aren't I a wealthy man? And that's wonderful for him up to a point. But if you go to the Waite-Smith version of the 4 of Discs, I think it speaks of a story that is also here in this, the 4 of Pentacles. It speaks to a story that's also in this one, which is that to protect one's assets can sometimes be an incredibly useful, if not necessary thing. And if you need to do it, you have the means to do it. So in other words, there may be something coming up this month that just asks you to hang on to your resources in a way that is just not to fritter something away, but rather gather things towards you and in some way to bolster your reserves so that there is something that you can then use. But the flip side to that is that, and then you see it, as I said, more clearly in the 4 of Pentacles in the Waite-Smith, is that you can't really move. So, which is fairly bloody obvious if you think about it. I'm saying, hold on to your resources, don't do anything. Well, then of course you're not going to move. But there comes a point where that can end up cutting you off from experience, from life, from others, and perhaps even from the enjoyment of what it is that you have. So there is this fine balance to be walked between conserving what it is that you have, but not conserving it to the extent that you never use it, because then what are you conserving it for? Why are you holding things in reserve for no reason? So the idea of power here is about, in some way, there is going to be a decision possibly that is going to make you decide whether or not whether you draw things to you instead of giving things away, whether you just stay put for a while, or whether you feel like there is a certain risk in shifting and rather sort of going into expenditure mode rather than conservation mode. Now, it feels very clear to me that that the prevailing weather in this is going to be conservation mode. I am not entirely sure from this reading whether that is something that you're going to come up against as a resistance or as something that comes in the form of advice. It's interesting that there is such a difference between the Empress and the 4 of Discs for me, not only in terms of look, but in terms of energy. And actually the Empress and the Emperor as well can sometimes, because the Emperor is hinted at in the 4 of Discs, they can be at loggerheads with each other. And actually, when I think of loggerheads, they can be at loggerheads. So, for example, the logging that's going on in the Amazon, now that is there to serve larger industrial, financial purposes, to be able to provide furniture, wood, to be able to graze cattle, to grow avocados, perhaps quinoa, all of those things that we want or that there is a demand for. But the cost of that is the breaking of a natural cycle in nature, that nature itself is compromised, which is why the Empress, to me, does sit at odds with power, because it really is this sort of standoff between the man-made realm and then the natural world. But of course, the Empress is much more powerful in terms of the fact that she's a major arcana. It's almost like the head of a very large company that goes in and uses resources from a particular country, and up against the idea of Gaia, and the idea that he could even think that there is any way of bargaining with the fallout of what happens when those resources are used. So there's this tension, I think, between the Empress and the 4 of Discs on the one hand, But on the other hand, I want to look at where they can possibly complement each other. And part of that, I think, is to do with that tension. So if there is a tension or a standoff between the idea of, man-made or man sort of basically wanting to in some way stamp authority on a particular thing, that perhaps the way to go is to find a way for these two differing forces to negotiate some kind of way that it works for both. So the Four of Discs, one of the words, of course, is integrity. So where is it that the idea of ruling one's realm, of staking one's claim, of holding on to what one believes or feels is, theirs, where is that able to be tempered with an integrity to know that there is a point past which you don't need to go? So in other words, you take as much as you need and you hold on to that, but then you don't take any more. I don't want this to be a moralizing thing at all, because I don't think it's that. I really don't. The cards are not moralizing, and if there is any moralizing, that's coming from the interpreter, i.e. yours truly. And that's not really it. But there is an uneasy sense of being able to work with these two energies together. But the way that they can work is to acknowledge the other. So for the Four of Discs, to acknowledge the presence of the Empress. For the Four of Discs, in some way, to be tempered by the fact that the Empress has been an energy that is foundational to this. And in some way to act with integrity within the remit that the Four of Discs asks for. So power does not have to come at a cost to the cycles, the natural cycles of your life. That power can actually fall in with the natural cycles of your life. There is no necessity to impose some kind of tyrannical regime over what it is that is entirely natural. Now, that sounds like it could be some massive political power play. I mean, I've already talked about logging and all of that. I don't mean that. It could be that. I mean, it's certainly playing out in the world at the moment. But I think that there is also an incredibly personal experience of working with power and integrity in one's own life over the smaller things that are to do with natural cycles. So, for example, being able to work with integrity and a sense of manifestation, of being able to control and align with the ability to manifest and control aspects of your own life, your physical life, your health, your well-being, your resources, in a way that that honors your body and your well-being and the well-being of you as a part of this planet. Again, that sounds like a grand idea, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. I mean, I am aligning with nature by going out in the garden and doing what I do in the garden. But when I'm out there, it's no sort of grand gesture. It is simply a small gesture that feels personally meaningful to me in my little sphere, which is my postage stamp size garden, in the east of England, but is connected to something bigger. And so there is an opportunity this month to experience a sense of holding to your own in terms of resources, whether they are your financial resources, your physical resources, i.e. your own body, or the resources that are created or held by more than one person in your life, including you, and where it is that you hold on too tightly, and where it is that holding on just tightly enough is able to afford some sense of stability and security without alienating or separating you off from everything, including the Empress. So it's a fine line to tread with the Four of Discs between being an authority in your realm and then becoming a bit of a dictator about it, or another way, a bit of a dick about it. It's of pushing people away or not allowing them to come closer, or pushing opportunities away and not allowing them to come closer. And excuse me, that was my cat sneezing in the background. In other words, being some kind of benign leader or ruler in your realm, where resources are shored up that are useful and beneficial, that they offer a sort of protection, that they are able to sort of fuel you over perhaps a time where resources are short. To conserve energy, to conserve money, but in some way then for a reason, because a 4 is a pause, it's not a stop. So it's a pause, and then the understanding behind that is that there is a shift out of that. There has to be a shift. But to avoid shifting directly into the melee of the 5s, because you don't necessarily need to do that, or you can negotiate it as clearly as possible, is to be able to work with the 4 in a way that is kingly. It's like a very deft emperor, an emperor that commands respect rather than demands it, or punishes people if they don't. So somewhere coming up this month, there is going to be this moment where your resources around you, whether they are physical or human, are there to just in some way hold you steady, or that the resources, you need to hold the resources steady for a particular reason, possibly not for very long, but just in order to create a little bit of space so that you're then able to do whatever it is that you need to do. The problem is then, of course, and as I've said, that the space mustn't be so spacious that it is alienating to others, to you, that there is no movement. So you go back to the figure in the 4 of Pentacles, for example, in the Waite-Smith. There is a time and place to hold on to those pentacles the way that he is, but of course he can't move. He can't go anywhere with that. So it's a temporary measure in order to achieve something, and then there is the shifting through. So that is your theme for this month, is the idea of power. What is power? When is power used? When is it employed? When is it misused, abused? And when is it that you run the danger of misusing it and abusing it, and not necessarily in an outward way, but in an inward way as well? Where is it that you have integrity? Where is it that you can bring things into fruition through the correct use of resources, by working with a sense of scarcity and understanding that scarcity means that things need to be pulled in for a while, temporarily, and how it is that then you can bring things through by doing that without going into some kind of miser or poverty consciousness, which is the 5 of Pentacles in the Waite-Smith. And the way you do that, of course, is then to tap back into the Empress, that idea of back to the body, back to the natural world, back to a sense of abundance, fertility, fecundity. So the fertility is another one. So and then I go back to fertility written on the card, and then an eye for the details. And so the eye for the details, I think, is going to be something that helps you to negotiate the 4 of Discs in a way that has grace. So one of the phrases that's just come to me, as the figure in power is, don't forget where you've come from. Don't forget your roots. Don't forget about the things that you have depended upon and have fed you, but also the things that depend upon you. In being able to solidify your position in some way, you can also be observant towards and supportive of the very things that you hold dear, which in some way have brought you to this point. And some of those things are profoundly important because they've been with you from the beginning. They are part of the world that you are in. It is about not losing your rootedness into the world. The 4 can be shallow. If you are pulling in or just conserving things, then your world can get very small in that sort of fortress-like environment. And in fact, if you look at the Thoth version of this card, it is a fortress. Now that is all well and good, but then everything becomes about the fortress, and it's very difficult to see past the 4 walls. And actually the Empress is asking you to take a broader view, to remember that the roots that connect you to your life, to life itself, sink way deep down into the ground. From a shamanic perspective, those roots need to be in the ground. Otherwise, there is a sense of groundlessness or an ungrounded sense, and energy is expended over nothing, and nothing much is achieved. And often the cost is your own sense of equilibrium and health. But those roots aren't just shamanic. They are also roots into one's own past, into one's own ancestors. This is about being aware of being human, having a lineage, understanding where you came from, whether that was pleasant or less than pleasant. There's no need for you to necessarily go and commune with where your roots are, but to just be aware of the fact that those roots are there and that they in some ways influence you quite profoundly, and perhaps even in ways that you aren't aware of. And there's that eye for details as well, where it is that your roots have in some way played a seminal part of in who you are and what your life looks like now. And those ways can be quite visible. They could be right in front of you and you not notice them. And they can be more subtle and invisible. And it is really about understanding that we are all related. In other words, we are interrelated. We carry the psychology of our ancestors. We carry our parents' psychology, their parents' psychology. That idea of the cycles of nature. There's something about being able to be your own person and hold to something while also knowing that you can never cut yourself off from what it is that you have come from. But there will be a need to hold to something, or there will be a moment where it feels prudent to exercise that sense of manifestation and integrity by bringing your resources to, bringing them towards you and just hunkering down for a bit, but just for a bit. This is not about isolation. This isn't about pretending that nothing can get to you and you are not impacted by others. I'll trust that is going to become clear over the course of the month, but of course, bring your mind back to the Empress all the time, because without the presence of the Empress, you would not be experiencing the Four of Discs. She is the foundation. She is a key player in this. And then the Tool card, or the card of agency, in some way focusing into this reading, because it's very broad, isn't it? I mean, I will trust that you will have the experience of the Four of Discs and Empress in your own way, and it will be unique to you, and that it will make itself apparent in some way. But the Tool card will further focus that. And that is the Four of Cups, which is luxury. So another 4, another sense of a pause or a moment to reflect. And this one's very clear for me. The Four of Cups is an interesting card because it is such a fantastical image on the front that sometimes it's quite difficult to get to in terms of the meaning. I often say it's very Dali-esque. There is a surreal aspect to it. I'm always entirely taken in by that what I call that some kind of slug, cosmic slug that's on the front, but actually now feels like a sort of cloth, or almost like a very klimt like picnic blanket that's getting swept up in this vortex. But I think that the message here is really very clear, and that is the idea of the because the Four of Cups is again a very big contrast from the Four of Discs, and also a contrast from the Empress. But the Four of Discs and the Four of Cups are almost the opposite of each other in terms of the meaning in this deck. The meaning in this deck is almost whimsical next to the very considered and serious and sober figure in the Four of Discs. There is no human figure in the Four of Cups. It is all about sort of things spilling over and into this sort of voluptuous, dancing kind of movement of luxury, as the card is. There's golds and purples. It's very royal. Those are the colours that are also in the background of the Six of Cups in this deck, and which is pleasure. So there is something here about really delving into sensual pleasures, in reveling in luxury, in being queen-like, in being empress-like, I guess, but the empress that really has kind of shifted away from the laws of nature and rather more turned to the idea of what is valuable or precious in the human world, which isn't necessarily natural. So this interplay between the Four of Discs and the Four of Cups, I think for me, the middle path is being able to get sucked into the extremes of neither of these. So getting sucked into the extreme of the Four of Discs is to become so bogged down in your stuff, in your possessions, in your need to cling on to something with all your might. And remember, it's in your physical world, so this will be your resources or a relationship or a business venture or something. So to get bogged down in your need to cling to that, or to fritter everything away in this beautiful sort of mindless sort of party mode where you just go and sort of blow the whole shebang, go out in the town and just spend everything, spend, and indulge. And so the fine line between that is that moment that I was saying in terms of the Four of Discs, where you know when to let go of the discs. You know when to stop grabbing things towards you, but you don't allow those discs to just sort of, almost as soon as they've gone into your hands, they're just disappearing, poof, as you go off and spend, or you go off and do this and indulge and all of that. Luxury is wonderful in terms of this card. I love the idea of it, but if you look at it, there isn't much substance to it, if you see what I mean, because it all feels slightly fantastical. So once, all of that stuff, you've had your spending spree. So for example, it's like you've gone and saved your money. And of course, you save your money, you've got to spend it at some time, but then to go out somewhere and then just blow it all at a casino and you don't get anything for it, might be fun at the time, luxury, this card, like a roulette wheel in the middle, but actually you then have nothing to show for it. What was the reason why you were saving it? Well, if you saved it just to blow it, that's great, you found your balance, that's it, there's your balance. But if you were saving it and then somehow the Four of Cups is some kind of reaction against that, so in other words, it is a total rebellion against the sturdiness, steadfastness, and rather staid Four of Discs. If the Four of Cups becomes a rebellion against the Four of Discs, then you can end up making some pretty dubious decisions in terms of what it is that you do, because you're not doing it from a rootedness, the Empress. You're not doing it from a sense of groundedness in what is true for you, that idea of integrity and manifestation. You're doing it because you are in some way sticking two fingers up at the figure in the Four of Discs. So and then in the end, the person who's poorer off is you. I think that the tool card here is to be aware of or be on guard for a reaction against something rather than a response to something. There is a very big difference in that. Reacting against is aligning with the very thing that you're reacting against. They are two sides of the same coin. They always are. They're inseparable. Rebelling against something is to, in one way or another, utterly align with it. But to respond to something, to be able to notice contrast, to be able to look at one's own behavior, look at the finer detail of one's behavior, to be rooted in your sense of self. But not only that, rooted in a sense of awareness that you are part of something bigger, to be observant of natural cycles and the natural world, which in some way is an antidote to the sheer explosive luxury of the Four of Cups, is to return to what is important, is to return to that single Ace of Cups that is there sitting separately, sort of off towards the rest of the reading. It is to remember what it is that's important. It's to remember what it is that you really love. It is to remember what is closest to your heart, rather than flinging things at somebody or flinging things away because in some way you don't want to deal with the reality of what's going on. And perhaps one of the realities is that you don't want to deal with what's closest to your heart, because perhaps that's the most threatening thing of all, is the thing that is close to your heart. And that feels important with this because in some way I think it goes back to the idea of what matters. What matters, and I mean that in its literal and metaphorical sense. And the Empress, of course, connecting us into our bodies, which is then, our bodies are the biggest barometers of truth that we have. So where the Four of Discs can serve us, completely identifying with the Four of Discs, I don't think will serve in some way. And completely throwing the Four of Discs out doesn't serve either. And at the bottom of this is about something that is really deeply heartfelt and so renders you vulnerable, which might make you want to run away screaming or spend yourself into a fury, or throw those discs out like that figure is and just keep them there so that people can't reach you. So this reading is actually quite complex, and I think one of the reasons being that the Empress is the first card. As soon as you start on a major, you know you're in for something, because it's how the major then shapes into our everyday lives, and that is with the two fours, the two following fours. So while the Four of Cups is the tool card, I think it's more of a tool of notice this. Notice what is luxurious, how much is too much luxury. So that is important. And of course, central is the Four of Discs, because this is really one of the things that's going to be playing out, is this kind of conservation of something, or the call to conserve or hold still. But actually, what's really going on underneath this is what is our connection into something bigger, because that's going to serve us with the other two cards. I will leave it there as ever with the invitation that if you want to send me any questions, any comments, then please do. You can send them to sarah@integratedtarot.com. You can contact me via my website. You can contact me via Facebook. But otherwise, I will send this out to you once more with a small apology for its lateness, but it is here finally, and I will speak to you again next month. Take care. Bye.